The studio is dark. It is late August 1966, and the air inside Sunset Sound hangs heavy with cigarette smoke and creative tension. 4 men have been working for hours, wrestling with a song that refuses to behave, that keeps expanding beyond the boundaries of conventional rock music. The tape machines have been running and stopping, as they search for something they cannot quite name. Ray Manzarek sits at his Vox Continental organ, fingers hovering over keys that have already traced patterns both hypnotic and unsettling. Robbie Krieger's guitar leans against an amplifier, its strings still humming with residual feedback. John Deansmore adjusts his drums for the 100th time, knowing that what they are about to attempt requires precision and abandon equal measure. And at the center of it all stands Jim Morrison, 22 years old, his dark curls falling past his shoulders, his leather jacket discarded on the floor, his eyes closed as he prepares to journey into territory that terrifies even him. They are recording their debut album, and this song, this sprawling, Oedipal, apocalyptic nightmare of a song, threatens to consume everything around it. Morrison has been carrying the words for months, scribbling verses on napkins and notebook margins, pulling imagery from Greek tragedy and Freudian psychology, from his own buried rage and the collective anxiety of a generation watching their world unravel. The band has been rehearsing the arrangement at the Whiskey A Go Go, where they serve as house band 6 nights a week, stretching the song longer and longer until it becomes a ritualistic journey that leaves audiences stunned or scandalized. Sometimes both producer Paul Rothchild watches through the control room glass. He has produced folk albums, jazz sessions, traditional rock recordings. But this is something else entirely. This is not a song in the conventional sense. This is theater, poetry, primal scream therapy, and musical composition merged into a form that has no precedent. The arrangement begins deceptively gentle Krieger's flamenco-influenced guitar, creating a Spanish garden at twilight, Manzarek's organ adding layers of melancholy beauty. But Morrison's opening words, delivered in a voice barely above a whisper, carry an undercurrent of menace that suggests the beauty will not last. The song builds slowly, hypnotically. Deansmore's drums enter with a jazz-inflected rhythm that propels without dominating. The band locks into a groove that feels both ancient and futuristic, evoking ritual music from cultures that worshipped darker gods. Morrison's voice rises from whisper to incantation. He is not singing in any traditional sense. He is channeling, summoning, becoming a conduit for forces that most people spend their lives trying to suppress. The lyrics move through surreal landscapes. A killer wandering through forests, a desperate ride toward the western lands, images of violence and transcendence intertwined until they become inseparable. And then, around the 7-minute mark, the song transforms completely. The tempo accelerates. Deansmore's drums become more insistent, more aggressive. Krieger's guitar shifts from Spanish romance to something raw, more primal. Manzarek abandons melody for repetitive, trance-inducing patterns. And Morrison, his voice now rising to a scream, delivers the passage that will make this song infamous, controversial, brilliant, and unforgettable. He confronts the father. He declares his desire for the mother. He rips away every social convention, every civilized pretense, and exposes this savage truth that Freud theorized and that every human being carries buried in their psyche. The band does not know, as they record take after take in that darkened studio, that they are creating something that will haunt and define them for the rest of their existence. They do not know that this song will be analyzed by musicologists and psychologists, celebrated by some as fearless artistic honesty and condemned by others as obscene provocation. They only know, in this moment, that they are touching something real, something dangerous, something that cannot be unsaid once it has been spoken. Rothchild, in the control room, makes a decision that will prove crucial. He lets the tape run. He does not interrupt, does not call for another take when Morrison's voice cracks with genuine emotion. He understands instinctively that what they are capturing is not a polished studio performance, but a document of transformation, a recording of the moment when four musicians stopped playing a song and started enacting a ritual. Take that will eventually appear on the album lasts 11 minutes and 43 seconds. In the context of 1967, when radio singles rarely exceeded 3 minutes, and albums were collections of discrete songs rather than unified artistic statements, this duration is radical. But the band refuses to compromise. This song, they insist, must be experienced in its entirety. To edit it would be to destroy it, to reduce a transformative journey to a mere curiosity. Before we continue deeper into this story, be part of our channel. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any incredible story we've prepared for you. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. The album, simply titled The Doors, is released in January 1967. Cover features four faces emerging from shadow, Morrison's gaze direct and unsettling. The track listing includes the song that will become their unexpected commercial breakthrough, along with several other pieces that showcase the band's range. But it is the final track on side one, the 11-minute epic, that immediately polarizes listeners and critics alike. Some reviewers call it brilliant, a groundbreaking fusion of rock music and serious artistic ambition. They praise Morrison's fearless exploration of taboo subjects, the band's willingness to stretch conventional song structures to breaking points. They hear echoes of Bertolt Brecht and Antonin Artaud, of avant-garde theater translated into rock and roll. They recognize that something genuinely new is happening, that boundaries between high art and popular culture are being demolished. Other critics are less kind. They find the song pretentious, indulgent, shocking merely for shock's sake. They question whether rock music is an appropriate vehicle for Oedipal drama. They worry about the corrupting influence on young listeners, who might take Morrison's fever dream lyrics literally rather than metaphorically. Some radio programmers refuse to play the album at all, citing the controversial passage as evidence that the Doors represent everything wrong with the counterculture. But among a certain segment of the youth audience, college students, artists, those who feel alienated from mainstream culture, the song becomes a nice anthem of sorts, or perhaps an anti-anthem. It speaks to their own rage against patriarchal authority, their desire to break free from societal constraints, their suspicion that beneath civilization's thin veneer lies something wilder and more authentic. They gather in dorm rooms and apartments, dropping the needle on the record and surrendering to the song's hypnotic pull, Morrison's voice guiding them through psychological territory they have never dared explore. Live performances of the song become legendary. At the Whiskey A Go Go, the Doors stretch it even longer than the recorded version, sometimes approaching 20 minutes, as Morrison improvises additional verses, adds new provocations, pushes himself and the audience toward catharsis or chaos, or both. The band's regular sets become events, attended not just by clubgoers seeking entertainment, but by those hungry for experiences that transcend entertainment, that offer something closer to transformation. Morrison's relationship with the song is complex and evolving. Some nights he commits fully, channeling genuine emotion and psychological truth. He closes his eyes and disappears into the character, if it is a character, and not simply Morrison himself, stripped of all defenses. His voice cracks and soars. His body moves with the rhythm, sometimes falling to the stage floor, sometimes gripping the microphone stand, as if it is the only thing preventing him from disappearing completely. These performances leave audiences shaken, unable to articulate exactly what they have witnessed, but certain they have seen something significant. Other nights, Morrison seems to mock the song, to distance himself from its intensity. He delivers the controversial passage with exaggerated theatricality, winking at the audience as if to say, "You don't really think I mean this, do you?" He forgets lyrics, or invents new ones that undermine the original's gravity. He drinks heavily before and during performances, using alcohol as armor against the vulnerability the song demands. The band grows frustrated with these inconsistent performances, but they also understand that Morrison is wrestling with demons the rest of them can only observe from a safe distance as the Doors' fame grows throughout. 1967, propelled by the success of their radio-friendly single, the 11-minute epic takes on additional significance. It becomes the song that separates casual fans from true believers. It is the track that people cite when arguing. The Doors are more than just a pop band, that Morrison is more than just a handsome face with a decent voice. It becomes proof of artistic seriousness, a statement of intent that aligns the Doors with the avant-garde rather than the mainstream. Music. Critics and scholars begin to analyze the song in academic terms. They trace its musical influences. The flamenco guitar suggesting Spanish culture, the modal organ suggesting Indian ragas, the jazz drumming suggesting bebop. They decode the lyrics, identifying references to Oedipus Rex, to Nietzsche's concept of the Dionysian, to Morrison's own fraught relationship with his father, a career naval officer who represents everything Morrison has rejected. They place the song in context with other long-form rock compositions emerging in this period, arguing that it represents a crucial evolution in popular music's ambitions and capabilities. Psychologists take interest as well. The song's explicit engagement with Oedipal themes makes it a subject for papers and conferences. Some argue that Morrison is performing a kind of public therapy, exercising his own psychological conflicts through art. Others suggest the song taps into universal anxieties about sexuality, family, death, the fundamental human experiences that civilization works so hard to regulate and contain. The fact that this is happening in the context of rock and roll, traditionally viewed as entertainment for teenagers, makes it all the more provocative and significant. The song's influence on other artists begins to manifest almost immediately. Musicians who have been constrained by the 3-minute single format hear the Doors' epic and realize that different rules are possible. Progressive rock, which will dominate the early 1970s, owes a debt to this willingness to let songs sprawl and explore, to prioritize artistic vision over commercial considerations. The notion that an album can be something more than a collection of potential singles, that it can be a unified artistic statement requiring sustained attention gains. Credibility in part because of this track's uncompromising length and intensity. But there is a darker side to the song's legacy. Morrison's public persona becomes increasingly entangled with the violence and transgression in his lyrics. Audiences begin to attend Doors concerts, expecting, even demanding, that Morrison act out the rebellious, dangerous character suggested by his songs. This creates pressure that Morrison, already struggling with alcohol and the burden of fame, finds difficult to manage. The more he is celebrated for his willingness to break taboos, the more he feels compelled to push further, to find new boundaries to violate. This dynamic will eventually contribute to the infamous incidents that mar the band's later career. The other band members watch this evolution with concern. Manzarek, Krieger, and Deansmore are serious musicians who take pride in their instrumental contributions, but they are increasingly overshadowed by Morrison's growing notoriety. The 11-minute song, which showcases their compositional and performance skills as much as Morrison's vocals, becomes in the public imagination primarily a Morrison creation, another example of the Lizard King's genius and excess. This imbalance creates tensions within the band that will never fully resolve. As months pass and the album continues to sell, the Doors find themselves performing the epic song in increasingly varied contexts. At the Hollywood Bowl, the 4000s, the song takes on the dimensions of ancient theater, Morrison's voice echoing across the amphitheater like a Greek chorus calling down judgment. At smaller venues, in intimate clubs where audience members can see the sweat on Morrison's face, the song becomes almost unbearably intense, a confrontation between performer and witness that leaves both parties exhausted. Recording the band's second album presents challenges. How do you follow up a debut that includes an 11-minute masterpiece? The pressure to recreate that success, while also evolving artistically, creates conflicts. Morrison wants to push even further into experimental territory, to create songs that are even longer, even stranger. The label wants more radio-friendly singles. Rothchild tries to mediate between artistic vision and commercial reality. The resulting album, released later in 1967, will include ambitious tracks, but nothing quite as radical as the debuts. Epic Closer Dot, by the time 1967 ends, the song has become part of rock's permanent canon. It is studied in music theory classes. It is cited in debates about censorship and artistic freedom. It is performed by countless cover bands, though few can match the intensity of the original. It has expanded the possibilities of what rock music can be, proven that audiences will embrace challenging, lengthy compositions if the artistic vision is strong enough. It has made The Doors one of the most important and controversial bands of the era, yet the song's creation remains, in some ways, mysterious even to those who are present. Rothchild would later speak of the recording session with an almost religious reverence, describing the atmosphere in the studio as charged with an energy he had never encountered before or since. Deansmore would recall the feeling of the song taking control, of the musicians becoming instruments themselves, of something larger than their individual wills. Krieger would describe the guitar parts as arriving almost unbidden, his fingers finding patterns that seemed to emerge from the music itself rather than from conscious composition. And Morrison, in the rare interviews where he discussed the song seriously rather than deflecting with humor or evasion, would speak of it as something that passed through him rather than something he created. He would describe the experience of performing it as a kind of possession, a surrender of his everyday consciousness to something older, something that predated language and culture. He would also admit to the toll such performances took, the way they left him feeling hollowed out, vulnerable, raw. The song's influence extends beyond music into broader cultural discussions about the nature of art and its relationship to transgression. Can art be genuinely radical if it does not risk offense? Should artists be held responsible for how their work is interpreted or misinterpreted by audiences? What are the limits, if any, that should constrain artistic expression? The Doors' epic composition becomes a test case in these debates, cited by defenders of artistic freedom and by those who worry about art's potential to corrupt or destabilize. Academic papers are written analyzing the song's structure, its use of modal harmony, its incorporation of elements from non-Western musical traditions. Music theorists map out the song's architecture, noting how it builds through distinct movements, the gentle opening, the narrative verses, the explosive climax, the aftermath of quiet devastation. They compare it to classical suites and jazz compositions, arguing that Morrison and his bandmates are working in a tradition that connects rock music to centuries of musical evolution. Psychoanalysts examine the lyrics, sometimes with Morrison's cooperation, more often without. They debate whether the Oedipal themes represent genuine psychological insight or merely facile application of Freudian theory. They consider whether Morrison's explicit treatment of taboo desires serves a therapeutic function for the artist, for the listener, for society at large, or whether it merely sensationalizes concepts that require more careful handling. These discussions take place in academic journals and popular magazines, bringing Morrison's lyrics into conversations normally reserved for literary works. The counterculture embraces the song as an anthem of rebellion against not just political authority, but the deeper structures of patriarchal society. Feminist critics offer varied interpretations, some praising Morrison for exposing the violence inherent in male socialization, others criticizing him for perpetuating misogynistic fantasies under the guise of psychological honesty. The song becomes a Rorschach test, revealing as much about the interpreter as about the original artistic intent. Morrison's parents, from whom he has become estranged, presumably hear the song at some point. Whether they recognize their own family dynamics in the brutal father-son confrontation is unknown, as Morrison refuses to discuss his relationship with them publicly. But friends and biographers note the timing Morrison, claiming to be an orphan even while his parents lived, the rage and longing in his voice when he delivers the controversial passage, the way he sometimes breaks down after performances, suggesting the emotional content is not merely theatrical. By late 1968, as the Doors prepare for their third album, the shadow of the 11-minute epic looms large. They have released other successful songs, have established themselves as one of rock's most important acts. But they are also, increasingly, defined by this one piece, its length, its intensity, its controversy. Morrison begins to resist performing it, sometimes refusing to play it at concerts, leaving audiences disappointed and angry. The band members argue about whether they are prisoners of their own creation, whether they can move beyond what they have already achieved. The song takes on additional weight as the cultural moment shifts. The optimism of 1967's Summer of Love gives way to the violence and disillusionment of 1968 and 1969. Political assassinations, race riots, the escalating war in Vietnam, all these contribute to a darker national mood. The song's apocalyptic imagery, which initially seemed like artistic exaggeration, begins to feel more like documentary realism. Morrison's visions of endings and destruction resonate with a generation watching their world tear itself apart. Live bootleg recordings of the song circulate, each performance slightly different, as Morrison improvises new verses or the band extends instrumental passages. Collectors trade these tapes, arguing about which version captures the definitive performance. Some prefer the studio recording for its clarity and control. Others insist that only in live performance, with Morrison's unpredictable energy and the audience's palpable response, does the song achieve its full power. These debates become part of rock culture's emerging oral tradition, establishing patterns that will continue for decades. The song's legacy grows as Morrison's own life becomes increasingly chaotic. His drinking spirals out of control. His weight fluctuates. His performances become more erratic, sometimes brilliant, sometimes disastrous. The contrast between the focused intensity of the original recording and Morrison's deteriorating condition creates a poignant subtext. The young man who channeled such controlled rage in 1966 is being consumed by forces he cannot master. The song, in retrospect, begins to seem prophetic, a warning Morrison issued but could not heed. By 1971, Morrison has moved to Paris, attempting to leave behind the rock star persona and reinvent himself as a poet. He has stopped performing entirely, focusing instead on writing and attempting to recover some semblance of normal life. The Doors continue without him, recording instrumental tracks and hoping he will return to add vocals. But Morrison seems finished with music, finished with the expectations and burdens that fame has imposed. The 11-minute epic that helped establish his reputation has become, perhaps, a reminder of everything he wants to escape. When Morrison dies in Paris on July 3, 1971, under circumstances that remain mysterious, the song takes on yet another dimension. It is reinterpreted as Morrison's artistic suicide note, a self-fulfilling prophecy, a man destroying himself through his own honesty. This reading is almost certainly too simple, too neat. But the song's themes of death and ending, of killing the father and dying in turn, seem to resonate with Morrison's actual fate in ways that are impossible to ignore. The remaining members of the Doors, Manzarek, Krieger, Deansmore attempt to continue, but eventually accept that the band cannot exist without Morrison. They disband, pursue other projects, occasionally reunite for special performances. But the shadow of their most ambitious creation follows them. In every interview, in every retrospective, the 11-minute song is discussed, analyzed, celebrated. It has become inseparable from the Doors' identity, the definitive statement of what the band represented and what Morrison's brief, brilliant, tragic career achieved. Decades pass. New generations discover the Doors through the original album, through documentary films, through cultural references in other media. The song remains shocking, powerful, relevant. Its length, once radical, now seems modest compared to progressive rock epics that extend past 20 minutes. But its emotional intensity, Morrison's fearless engagement with taboo subjects, the band's musical sophistication, these elements ensure its continued impact. Film director Francis Ford Coppola uses the song in his 1979 Vietnam War epic, recognizing that its apocalyptic imagery perfectly captures the moral chaos of that conflict. Opening guitar notes, followed by Morrison's whispered words, become forever associated with helicopters rising through jungle dawn, with the surreal horror of a war that destroyed both its participants and the nation that sent them. This cinematic use introduces the song to millions who might never have sought out the Doors' music otherwise. Cementing its place in cultural consciousness, music historians place the song in context with other landmark recordings of the 1960s. It stands alongside the Beatles' experimental work, Bob Dylan's literary rock, the Velvet Underground's avant-garde provocations. It represents a moment when rock music was expanding its ambitions, refusing to accept limitations imposed by commercial considerations or conventional good taste. The song helped establish that rock could be serious art, that albums could demand sustained attention, that musicians could engage with psychological and philosophical themes previously reserved for other artistic forms. Song's influence on subsequent artists is profound and varied. Punk rockers hear in Morrison's raw intensity and confrontational lyrics a template for their own rebellion. Progressive rock musicians take inspiration from the song's extended form and complex arrangement. Alternative rock bands in the 1980s and 1990s cite the Doors as crucial influences. Particularly, this track's willingness to explore darkness without apology or sentimentality. Each generation reinterprets the song through its own cultural lens, finding in it reflections of contemporary anxieties and aspirations. Academic courses on rock history inevitably include the song in their syllabi. Students who were not born until decades after Morrison's death study the lyrics, analyze the musical structure, debate the song's meaning and significance. Professors lecture on its Oedipal themes, its musical innovations, its role in expanding rock's artistic possibilities. Term papers are written comparing Morrison's poetic technique to Rimbaud and Blake, the writers who most influenced him. The song that was once considered dangerously obscene is now taught in universities, dissected in textbooks, preserved in the Library of Congress as culturally significant. But perhaps the song's most enduring quality is its continued ability to unsettle and provoke. Even listeners who know what is coming, who have heard it dozens of times, still feel a visceral response when Morrison's voice rises to that climactic scream. The song retains its power to shock, to make listeners uncomfortable, to force confrontation with aspects of human psychology that most people prefer to ignore. This durability suggests that Morrison and his bandmates tapped into something genuinely universal, not merely a product of their particular cultural moment. The other Doors members, in later interviews, reflect on the song with mixed feelings. Pride in what they achieved, certainly recognition that they created something genuinely groundbreaking, something that expanded the possibilities of popular music. But also sadness, knowing that Morrison never found peace, that the intensity he channeled into his art eventually consumed him. And perhaps some regret that the song's success and notoriety overshadowed other aspects of their work, reducing the Doors in many minds to this single 11-minute statement. Manzarek, in particular, speaks often about the recording session, describing the atmosphere as almost supernatural. He recalls Morrison disappearing into the performance, becoming something other than his everyday self. He remembers the band locking into a groove that felt effortless despite the song's complexity. And he emphasizes the collaborative nature of the creation, Morrison's lyrics and voice, certainly, but also Krieger's guitar work, his own organ patterns, Densmore's rhythmic foundation. The song, he insists, represents what the Doors achieved collectively, 4 distinct musical voices creating something none could have produced alone. Krieger focuses on the musical composition, the flamenco influences that give the song its distinctive color. He describes the challenge of creating guitar parts that could support Morrison's intensity without competing with it, that could shift from beauty to menace and back again. He takes pride in the arrangement's sophistication, the way the band manages to build tension over 11 minutes without losing the listener's attention, without resorting to mere volume or speed. Densmore discusses the drumming challenges, the need to provide both structure and spontaneity. His jazz background proved crucial, allowing him to follow Morrison's vocal improvisations while maintaining the rhythmic foundation the song requires. He speaks of the performance as a high-wire act, a constant risk of losing the groove, the exhilaration when everything clicked into place. The song's legacy extends into unexpected domains. Therapists report clients referencing it when discussing their own family conflicts. The controversial passage, despite or perhaps because of its shocking directness, gives people language for emotions they have struggled to articulate. Morrison's artistic courage in addressing taboo subjects creates permission for others to confront their own psychological complexities. The song becomes, in a sense, therapeutic not despite, but because of its willingness to venture into uncomfortable territory. Cultural conservatives continue to cite the song as evidence of rock music's corrupting influence, proof that the counterculture was fundamentally destructive and nihilistic. These critics miss the song's complexity, reducing it to its most provocative elements while ignoring the artistry and psychological sophistication. But their ongoing opposition testifies to the song's continued relevance, its ability to provoke strong reactions decades after its creation. The song also becomes a touchstone for discussions about artistic authenticity versus commercial success. The Doors achieved both. Their debut album sold millions, but it also included this uncompromising, radio-unfriendly epic. This combination seems increasingly rare as the music industry becomes more focused on safe, marketable products. The song represents a moment when major labels were willing to take risks on artists with unorthodox visions, a moment many believe has passed. Collectors obsess over different pressings and editions of the album, debating which version offers the best sound quality, which mastering most faithfully reproduces the original recording. Audiophiles argue about whether vinyl or digital formats better capture the song's dynamics, its shifts from whispered intimacy to explosive catharsis. These technical discussions, while sometimes missing the artistic forest for the sonic trees, reflect the continued reverence many feel for the recording. The song's place in the Doors' catalog remains unique. Other tracks may be more immediately accessible, more radio-friendly, more commercially successful. But this 11-minute journey represents the band's highest artistic achievement, the fullest expression of their collective vision. It is the song that justifies taking the Doors seriously as artists rather than merely entertainers, the track that demonstrates their willingness to risk everything in pursuit of something true. Morrison's poetry, published after his death, reveals the same preoccupations that animate the song: death, transformation, the destruction of limiting structures, a search for authentic experience beneath civilization's constraints. The song can be understood as Morrison's poetic vision translated into musical form, his literary ambitions realized through rock and roll. This synthesis of high and low culture, of serious art and popular entertainment, represents one of the 1960s most significant cultural achievements. The song's influence on music video aesthetics, once that medium, emerged in the 1980s, is notable. Directors creating visual accompaniments to long-form songs learned from the way the Doors structured their epic building through distinct movements, using dynamics to create narrative arc, allowing space for improvisation within a controlled framework. Though the band never made a proper music video for the song, its influence shaped how others approached translating extended musical compositions into visual form. Cover versions of the song are rare, perhaps because few artists feel capable of matching the original's intensity or justifying its length. Those who attempt it generally fail, their performances feeling either overblown or timid, unable to find the balance the Doors achieved between control and chaos. This difficulty in covering the song speaks to its uniqueness, the way it emerged from the specific chemistry of four musicians at a particular moment in time. The recording technology available in 1966 was relatively primitive compared to modern standards, 4-track tape machines, limited effects, minimal overdubbing. Yet the song sounds remarkably modern, its production values holding up decades later. This durability results partly from the band's performance, which required little studio manipulation, but also from Rothchild's production philosophy. Capture the truth of the moment rather than constructing perfection through technical means. As the 21st century unfolds, the song continues to find new audiences. Streaming platforms introduce it to listeners who are not alive during the Doors' active years, who discover it without the cultural baggage that surrounded its initial release. These new listeners often respond with the same mixture of fascination and discomfort that greeted the song in 1967, suggesting its themes and intensity transcend particular historical moments. The song also becomes a reference point in discussions about rock's evolution and potential decline. Some critics argue that rock has lost the ambition and daring represented by this track, that modern popular music plays it safe in ways the Doors refused to do. Others counter that rock's golden age, mythologizing, prevents recognition of contemporary artists taking different kinds of risks. But all agree that the 11-minute epic represents something significant, a high-water mark against which subsequent music can be measured. Morrison's grave in Paris becomes a pilgrimage site for fans, many of whom cite this particular song as the reason they fell in love with the Doors. They leave poetry, flowers, bottles of whiskey tributes to an artist who dared to speak uncomfortable truths, who channeled his demons into art rather than suppressing them. The song, more than any other in the Doors' catalog, seems to capture what these pilgrims are mourning, not just a talented musician, but a kind of honesty they feel is missing from contemporary culture. The final minutes of the song, after the climactic confrontation, offer a kind of musical devastation, quiet, exhausted, devastated. Morrison's voice drops to a whisper again, but it is not the seductive whisper of the opening. It is the voice of someone who has been through battle, who has burned down everything, and must now confront what remains. The band plays with similar exhaustion, the instruments sounding drained of the energy that propelled the middle sections. This denouement is as crucial as the explosion that preceded it, offering no easy resolution, no comfort, only the aftermath of transformation. Looking back across more than half a century, the song stands as both a time capsule and a timeless work. It captures the particular anxieties and ambitions of its era, the questioning of authority, the desire to break through conventional limitations, the belief that art could change consciousness. But it also addresses universal human experiences, the struggle against inherited trauma, the longing for transformation, the recognition that endings are necessary for beginnings. These dual qualities, historical specificity and timeless resonance, ensure the song's continued relevance. The Doors never recorded another song quite like it. Their subsequent albums included ambitious tracks, certainly, but nothing that matched this debut's epic length and intensity. Perhaps they recognized that lightning cannot strike twice, that this particular combination of elements, Morrison's psychological state, the band's chemistry, Rothchild's production, instincts, the cultural moment, could not be replicated. The song stands alone in their catalog, both representative of their aesthetic and uniquely extreme. The recording that four young men created in a Los Angeles studio in 1966 has outlived its creators, outlasted the cultural movement that produced it, and continues to challenge and reward listeners decades later. Its 11 minutes contain multitudes' beauty and violence, poetry and primal scream, musical sophistication and raw emotion, expanded the possibilities of rock music, proved that popular art could be both commercially successful and artistically uncompromising, and established Jim Morrison as one of rock's most fearless and troubled voices. The song's title, simple and absolute, proved prophetic in ways none could have imagined. It marked an ending for conventional notions of what music could be. It predicted the end of the innocence that characterized early rock and roll, the end of the assumption that popular music should merely entertain rather than disturb. And, with Morrison's death just 5 years after the recording, it came to seem like a premonition of a personal ending, an artist who burned too bright to last. But endings, as the song itself suggests, are never absolute. The music continues. The influence persists. New listeners discover the track and feel the same jolt of recognition, a sense that someone has articulated truths they knew but could not express. The 11 minutes that Morrison and his bandmates committed to tape in 1966 continue to resonate, continued to challenge, continued to prove that rock and roll, at its best, can be more than entertainment. It can be art, ritual, therapy, revolution. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any incredible story we've prepared for you. See you in the next story.